right, let's kick off with jockey Danny Brock, who's received a 15-year disqualification from the judiciary panel, Cornelius, having been found guilty of corruption. Quite a significant case, this, and not insignificant suspension.
Yeah, and 7 years for
disqualification.
Sean McBride as well, and there were other people involved who are currently suspended anyway, or their presence on racecourses is suspended, so they're not going to be allowed back in for some time. This was described as an extraordinary conspiracy, a spider's web of conspiracy surrounding a whole lot of races on the all-weather, particularly around a horse called Samovar, and particularly around a two-horse race at Southwell, and there were considerable bets on the winner that day, which was odds on. Samovar was slowly out of the stalls and was never played a part. Described in the Racing Post as reluctant to race, but the conclusion was that was a stopping incident involving Danny Brock. It is a significant suspension, and Danny Brock is upset, he says. He has said in a few quotes subsequently about the way he's been portrayed. But crucially, he didn't take part in this whole thing. The fact is that Sean McBride did take part, did engage in the process, did have a lawyer. He's got a shorter suspension, which 7 years, which may or may not be relevant, but he was able to put his case, whereas Danny Brock didn't put any form of a case. So inevitably he's been portrayed. Louis Weston, the barrister representing the British Horse Racing Authority, said this is a corrupt person, this is somebody we don't want in racing, and clearly Danny Brock didn't come back.
Did you see the race, the two-horse race?
At Southwell I did, yeah.
What did you think?
Being honest, to the eye, it didn't look very good, and you can all make mistakes, but some you can't really defend.
Yeah, 15 years.
And the crucial thing for Danny...
He said he may yet appeal.
He may yet appeal, and he's actually denied wrongdoing. He's involved in the greyhound world now as a trainer, and clearly this is very relevant to him because although we normally talk, when we're talking about suspensions in one jurisdiction applying in other jurisdictions around the world, here's a suspension which may or may not be followed up in the greyhound world, but clearly
it will be.
Clearly it will be. I heard the head of the greyhound board talking this week, and the fact of the matter is that if you're proven to be, or you're shown to have been dishonest in one world as regards betting, and that's horse racing, then the greyhound world is clearly has very similar types of opportunities, similar types of standards as well. So hence one suspects that that's going to have implications for him.
All right, Flightline and Frankel. We probably don't need the 2 minutes on this, but Flightline got a rating of 140 in the world's best racehorse classifications. Ceremony held in London last week at the Banqueting House. All his connections were there. Frankel had achieved the same end-of-year classification at the end of his career. Is this a convenience, Cornelius, or are they horses of exactly equivalent ability? Well,
normal methodology has been adopted by those involved, said Dominic Gardner-Hill, the head of handicapping at the British Horse Racing Authority. It's very convenient that they've landed on the same number, and I think it's very a lot of people are very happy that the same number is there. Whether or not it's actually deserved for Flightline is debatable. The horse didn't run that many times, only 6 times, was it? 3 times as a 3-year-old, 3 times as a 4-year-old. However, he did win major races around the world in emphatic style. Go on.
I was going to say, is it possible to actually accurately compare
and that is the point, isn't it?
a dirt horse with a turf horse? I mean, Harry, you might have a view on this.
Yeah, I'd say not. It's very hard to compare the two. I mean, I've never ridden on the dirt. I wouldn't have any experience about the dirt at all. But I'm sure, Frankel's done it, in here, this country, and on the turf. It's hard to compare the two. But
it's hard enough to compare.
What we do know is two exceptional horses of their era.
And you know, the fact is that it's hard enough to compare generations, let alone racing surfaces, isn't it? But what was striking was that nobody could have accused the British handicapping authority of being in any way biased towards Frankel, because it was revealed actually in the penultimate race that Flightline took part in. They might have gone 140 at that point after the brilliant success at Del Mar, but that it was others who said, could this be a flash in the pan? Do we need to be careful about this? So I think he went 139 at that point, didn't he? And then 140 after the Breeders' Cup Classic. But what was striking was that, going back to Dominic Gardner-Hill, who's a very sort of feet-on-the-ground sort of merchant, and I have personal experience of that. I remember once being at Hamilton races with him, and a Glasgow gangster came up to him and said, "Why do you keep crucifying my horses?" And he kept calm about that. He keeps calm about most things. But the fact is, he described, what was it? These performances were you know, a monster, a brutal galloper, and two monstrous performers that he has seen in his time.
I'm more worried about your knowledge of Glasgow gangland, to be honest, Cornelius. But that's another
for
story
another day.
altogether. Yeah,
you need to be superstitious in those confines.
The Clarence House chase has been relocated after much discussion to Cheltenham next weekend. It retains, obviously, its Grade 1 status. The prize money is significantly less. I'm going to bring Paul Nichols here in on this, because, Paul, you might have put a horse back in this race under different circumstances.
Yeah, I just wonder nowadays if a race like this it's great. It's been put on Saturday, obviously. It's been at Cheltenham before. But perhaps, you know, if it was Rio offered on Monday, you wouldn't get a whole heap more horses in, but it would give the positive. Look, for Grenadine, for example, I never put him in Ascot. It was never going to suit him. He wasn't going to be ready. And it would have been a lot of money just to have entered him, just in case we got into this scenario. But now we are where we are. If the option was there to enter Monday, I might have had a little look with him, especially with a dry week. And it would just give the option a few more horses. There would never be many, but it just would open the race up a bit for another day.
Yeah, so if at the moment you have to take the original early closing entries, of which there were only 8, but Paul might have had a look, Harry, had the option been open. Would you have had a look with Newbie Negra or not?
No, possibly not him, because he was always going to Cheltenham. But like Paul was saying, it just gives you the options, especially now with a lot of cancellations of meetings being closed. I'm sure it would have been better for everyone if it was reopened.
I said actually yesterday on the Saturday programme we were doing yesterday afternoon, your brother did this, didn't he, with Protectorate? He stuck him in the King George in case it was cancelled. So he put the early closing race in case it was abandoned.
Yeah, well,
that's quite good forethought. That's
how you've got to think.
That's how you're thinking, isn't it? But like Paul just said there, different track, different ground. They might have got 1 or 2 more runners.
But different. But again, you're still spending a few quid getting in at the very early closing stage. Yeah,
of course you are, and it's a difficult one. You know, asking people to enter from such a long way out when they're not even sure whether the horse can run for such an amount of money. It's quite an ask, really.
And Ergo Men, it looks like we'll take on Edward Stone in next weekend's Clarence House Chase. You'll be able to see that on Racing TV. Festival entries are well down, Cornelius. Just by how much?
35%, isn't it? 10 races
in the Grade 1 novices,
so far. Yeah. Down 35% in some areas. Some debate on this. Nicky Henderson, inevitably having been involved in festivals for 50 years plus, is immediately asked for a quote, and he said, "You know, my owners don't see Cheltenham as the be-all and end-all." When I hear trainers say that, I do think of spin doctors, and I think of gritted teeth and putting a sort of a good face on something, because most people do see it as the be-all and end-all.
Should we get Paul Nichols involved here? On. Paul, what do you think? The entries are down numerically. You've got some nice bullets to fire this year, but what's your overall read of the situation?
I've just entered probably the same amount as I normally do at the early closing stage. There's Kim Bailey actually made a point this week whether nowadays it might be better not to have such an early closing structure, and you could enter near the day. We might get more options, and you know whether anti-post betting helps with all of that, I don't know. But I don't actually get you need possibly the very big races. I don't get that you need entries close so early. But we always put plenty in. Yeah. Look, whether you think Cheltenham's a be-all and end-all, or there are other options, you make that decision near the time when you see how the horses are and save some entry. You do, but you still enter them at this stage. And we've just done as per normal, to be honest with you.
Don't you think part of it for British owners is they've seen the Irish dominance in recent years. The pendulum has very much swung towards Ireland for the time being. So if you're going to have a go at the festival, you know, the chances are you're not going to win. You're going to have to be very lucky to win. And there are other options around, whether that could be at Aintree, at Ayr, or one of the other
greater
events.
efficiency in entries. Is that something? So would you be more selective about what you're entering now, perhaps, than you might have been 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, possible, but you're going to enter horses. The fact of the matter is that the trainer's job, and you're going to enter horses where they can win. So if that might suit them better at Aintree, then you wait for Aintree. If you think they've got a good chance of winning going to Cheltenham, then you enter. But obviously at the festival you do have, you know, owners' ambitions to go and have a run at the festival. It is the festival. So there's obviously some horses go and take their chance. But you've got to run them in the races so they can win.
Who's your single best chance for winner as you sit here at this stage?
Protectorate.
He's your single best chance for winner of the whole week?
I think he's the best chance we've got at the winner, yeah.
That's a very, very diplomatic answer as well, because it's avoiding all those ones that have got about a stone in hand. And all that.
Well, yeah, can't tell you all about them, though.
No, well, you can, but you're not going to. Fair enough. Noble Yates next, who wasn't going to run at Lingfield this afternoon anyway, because it's been abandoned, but that's academic now. He was supposed to run at Lingfield this weekend. He couldn't. He was not qualified because his trainer Emmett Mullins hadn't uploaded the correct vaccination information onto the Weatherby's app. In Ireland, in Irish races, using the same app, you only have to do that when you declare the horse. In Britain, you have to do it at the 5-day entry stage, and it's the second time he's been caught out on this. The owner of the horse, Robert Whaley-Cohen, whilst accepting the trainer's complete responsibility and probably not being very happy about it, said that couldn't there be a system like at the airport? You go there, they say, sorry, you haven't filled in your COVID information, you fill it in, and away you go.
Isn't that a fair point? You know, if you're going to buy something online and you do something wrong, you don't fill in one of the things, something flashes up and says you haven't put your postcode in, or you haven't done whatever. So, you know, it is clearly the trainer's responsibility, and clearly it's been quite well publicised that the rules have changed, and so the horse wouldn't have been able to run and goes to Cheltenham, I think, now, does it not, for the Cotswold Chase? Yeah. Excuse me. But the fact is, you would have thought the technology of the 2020s would allow that to happen, and I dare say the boffins, Weatherbys, will be looking at that. But I think other people are said to have been caught out by this. I think Kim Bailey said he'd been caught out over something, but the meeting was abandoned anyway. So it's something that needs to be looked at.
Paul, what do you think? Tough luck, or do they need to show a bit of flex here?
I think with a lot of things these days, we need to show some flexibility. But rules are rules. I suppose they put them in for a reason. I know my team spent hours and hours making sure it's right. That's a tricky one. Depends which side of the fence you're on, where you're in the situation. If you're in the trainer, as in Emmett's case, you're going to be not very happy because you haven't been able to run. It's worked out okay for him in the end, but you know, it's always a difficult one. No one's going to be happy whichever way you look at it.
All right. Not many people were happy, it seems, Cornelius, with the fun fair at Newbury.
And nobody. Ultimately, it was
before Christmas.
Yeah, this was the fun fair that started marginally before the Coral Gold Cup meeting.
Yeah. It's in all the photos, in the back of your photos on Lamilos, isn't it? I'd imagine.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I don't know. It caused
very big helter-skelter.
Yeah, I'm not sure it created quite the disruption that it was suggested beforehand. It might have done, but it did produce quite a lot of ridicule for Newbury at the time. And this week they've said it was a waste of time. That they've made a material loss out of the whole thing. The footfall into the fun fair was not quite what it was. I find Newbury just a really astonishing story. I think it's one of the most mysterious stories of the last 30 years in racing in some respects. Here's a racecourse in one of the most prosperous parts of these islands, a racecourse that is widely acclaimed both for its flat racing and for its jumping. Some of its jumping is iconic around the old Hennessy Gold Cup. It's built goodness knows how many, in fact 1,500 residential properties around the place, honouring Denman Drive, honouring some of the great names, Rondetto Avenue, Hennessy Crescent as well. And yet, when there's a drama, it often seems to be around Newbury. Charlie Johnston sat on this very sofa, 2 weeks ago, and he said that their operation was all but boycotting Newbury. They had 5 runners at Newbury in 2022. They had more runners at Salisbury. They had miles more runners at Ascot, Epsom and the 2 Newmarket racecourses. And whenever there's a discussion about prize money, it always seems to be about Newbury and the poor show at Newbury. So I just think I love it. I think it should be doing better.
Okay. And the fun fair didn't work, lost money. I suspect that won't be coming back next year. It wouldn't be a show like this without talking about the whip at the moment. You've had quite a bit to say about this during the course of the season, and I know you don't really want more than 2 minutes on it this time, but you're in the whip bedding in period of the new regulations, and there would have been 44 individual bans dished out last week under the new regulations, 29 of which would have been the non-discretionary raising of the hand above shoulder height. There you are. That's what the Whip Review Committee looked at in week 1 of the data. There'd have been 1 disqualification under the new rules as well. What's going to cause the most problems?
Looking at that, Nick, obviously the 29 above shoulder height and 19 individual jockeys obviously is quite alarming, but that rule has always been there, and I think it's something that's now been used a lot more in recent weeks in this bedding in period. But
so now there's no discretion now, whereas there was before.
So obviously we wanted clear rules on what was going on, but there is still, I think, a few things to talk about along with the BHA about how the bedding in period has gone. So we've still got to discuss a few things practically. So
so it's an ongoing consultation period. You still feel like you've got a bit of ground to decide over.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously that's the whole point of having this bedding in period, bedding in for the stewards, the BHA, the PJ and the jockeys to try and get this right once, hopefully, to be honest, once and for all. So hopefully we can go somewhere and go forward and put it all behind us, to be honest.
Once and for all.
The headline is you would have had 44 whip bans in a week, which is 5 times what you would normally have had. So that's, on the one hand, that's your inflammatory headline. The other hand, Cornelius, you can't really judge a bedding in period until you're well into the bedding in period.
And especially when the weather has been, so the first lot of numbers have come out, but the second lot of numbers aren't really going to mean anything, are they? Because there's only been 1 National Hunt meeting over the last 7 days, and it's going to be, weather permitting, there'll be a few more over the coming days. It is one area that is particularly causing controversy, isn't it? It's the above head height, and that is something the bedding in period must continue to look at. And the bedding in period is for the jockeys, but it's also for the authorities.
Yeah, exactly. So they can figure it out.
There can be further meetings, and I think there's a word in there in the statement, wasn't there? Practical stuff.
There it is.
Considerations.
Considerations. To the top line there. Finally, on this point, Harry, how confident are you that you can get to the Cheltenham Festival and that the jockeys as a body can abide by the new rules that you and the BHA board have joined forces to put in place?
Yeah, hopefully by the time we get there, everyone is completely understanding of what is required. I think jockeys we have got to take the full responsibility. We want to take that, but also we need sensible decisions, and good stewarding, going forward to protect a competitive sport, to be honest. But I think by the time we get to Cheltenham, hopefully we can get it right. But it's going to be hard for the Irish jockeys coming over, I think. But hopefully we can get it right.
All right. For the moment, thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Good luck next week. Good to have you on the show. Those were this week's talking points.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.